Okay. I think we're live. Somebody's going to have to respond to me in a minute or two as soon as we get the lag under control. Yay! Okay, perfect. It looks like we are in fact live. Fabulous. Okay, so hi. There are a few people here so far, which is very exciting. Yeah, I haven't ever done this before, so this is, thank you, somebody just said happy anniversary. So this is going to be a little bit of the chaos machine because I've literally never, actually that's not even true, is it? I did the moderation for the disabilities panel during COVID last year. All right, guess my brain is just completely fried, so we'll see how we do. All right, y'all get to see what I'm like without editing. It's going to be a fun time. I'm excited. I'm excited for y'all to see that. It's going to be interesting. So I'm going to, while we chat, do a little bit of sewing for finishing up my Foundations Revealed project, because it is, yeah, we're getting down to the wire, I know. Sorry. So while I answer some questions, I'll be doing a little bit of sewing. So we're having a nice little cozy sewing chat. So that'll be good. So I'm going to go over some questions that I got on Instagram and on my comments for my last video. And then I think I'll probably be able to go through the comments of this video in the chat, and we'll see how that goes. I'm not sure how that works, but we'll be able to find it. We can do it together, I swear. If all of you can't hear me, by the way, or anything like that, please keep me posted. Everybody's saying really nice things in the comments, which is fantastic. Sorry, in the chat. But if there's any issues, please let me know. So let's see what these questions were. Okay. Do you think I could find them? No. Okay. So first one was, what costume or piece of costume that you have made are you most proud of? It's sort of weird. It's a double, there's a sort of double barrel to this question. On the one hand, I think the costume that I'm most proud of at kind of any given moment is the last one that I've made. Like it's really curious how really, really consistently I am just so totally in love with the last thing that I've done, and that is the best and the be all and end all, and I'm so proud of it, and it's amazing and wonderful. And that lasts for about 30 seconds until I start to see all of the things that are wrong with it and all of the things that I want to fix about it and all of the things that I could have done differently, not in a sort of self-loathing way. Hi, Fanny from Germany. Not in a sort of self-loathing way, but more in just I've learned things in making it. I learned things that you look back on and you're like, oh, I could have done that, and that would have made that better. And how fabulous is that? So it sounds like a negative thing, but usually I have this like little high of like, this is the best thing I've ever made and it's fantastic. And then it'll sort of peter out, and that mood will eventually go away. And when that mood goes away and I haven't got a newly made thing, I think the thing that comes back to me the most isn't really a costume piece. It's just one of the first pieces of clothing I ever made. I have not been making clothing that long. I think the very first piece of clothing I made for myself was a pair of these like enormous sort of palazzo style pants that I made, I think like the summer of 2019. Like, it has not been a long time. But those palazzo pants, I like looked up a tutorial on YouTube. I don't even think I had a pattern. I think I traced out some pants that I already owned and sort of just kind of, I mean, I did the thing that I consistently do now, which is just kind of figure it out. Like, you know, you look up a little thing here and there to make sure that you're not totally screwing it up, but then you just sort of do the thing and make it work. And that works up to a certain point, but it doesn't matter. The fabric that I used was this beautiful blue geometric print. It's a Japanese style print. I actually got it in Japan when I was there a few years ago, and I bought some fabric because I actually bought it for my mom, but it's just what I did back then was for my mom. Whenever I went anywhere, I would buy her fabric. And so she then didn't use it for a few years. And when I started making clothes, thought, oh, okay, there you go. This is for you. Because I can't make anything with it, because I had foolishly bought things that were not good for quilting. And my mom's a quilter. So I had bought things that in a weird prophetic way would be mine again. Whatever. Oh, I see people say hi. Hi, Faye. Hi, everybody. Everybody's saying hi from their different places, and it's so much fun. Muse, starting with pants, bold. Making pants is a nightmare. Yeah, it weirdly discovered that. Correct. Muse and Dionysus. I don't know which of you is as at the helm right now, but you're both correct. It was an intense process, but weirdly, it was also kind of liberating. It was one of those things where I continue to do this to this day. I will pick a project that is just way too ambitious. It's not okay. I really, really need to know my limits a little bit more. But one of these things that I do when I kind of go bold and go intense is I end up with these really cool things, and it sort of convinces me that I can do things, and convinces me that it is possible for me to do not the impossible, but like the really, really ambitious, and that is really encouraging. So I'm all for it. But yeah, I think I might bust them out later. I think they're in a mending pile somewhere, because early in my sewing career, didn't finish the seams. What can you do? So yeah, so 2 answers to that question. 1 is always the most recent, and 2 is the palazzo pants, which just like, I think it's like anything. The first thing that you make that actually works out, you're just like, oh, dang, that was awesome. I just realized that I've misplaced my thimble. This does not bode well. Okay, like I sat down. Where the fuck? Surely not got far. It was with the thread. This is riveting content, Liz. Good job. This is the people. This is what they want. Ah, found it. It's underneath my skirts. Go figure. All right. Next question. This is from Faye, who's watching. Hi, Faye. What's been your favorite part of doing a 17th century costume? This is also answering what I've seen a couple people in the chat ask. I am currently working on a 17th century, I think sort of court gown, banqueting gown, ball gown type thing. It is actually for the Foundations Revealed competition. I am doing an adaptation of Ella from Ella Enchanted as imagined in the 17th century. For reasons which will become evident in the videos that I'm going to be doing about it, as well as in the Foundations Revealed video that I'll be doing, which is just the 1-minute preview video, and that'll be coming out tomorrow when I finish it, I promise. But yeah, it's right now I'm doing the waistband of the skirt, and the skirt is about 17 different colors of purple on a dark purple waistband, and it is, when I do the math right, I think I did so. I think it's 4 yards of fabric that's been gathered into around 28 inches for a waistband. So 4 yards, for those of you who are not in Imperial, it's almost exactly 4 meters. It's roughly the same measurement. It's 140 something inches. So yeah, there's a lot of pleating going on here, and so I'm just trying to catch all of the bits. But to answer your question, Faye, because you're so kind as to ask it, I've been having such a fun time with the shape of the stays are very similar in shape to how they would be further on in the centuries with the 18th century, with the like 18th century stays that you kind of see everybody do that are sort of semi-boned. Forgive the noise, by the way. My spouse has decided that this is the time to make the coffee. So the stays are very similar in shape, give or take, but the covering, they're smooth covered stays, and you'll see them in a sec when I start working on them. But the smooth covered stays have that extra layer where it's outerwear, it's not underwear. And so you have to be able to, like, the inside, it can be as rough and ready as you need it to be because it's the inside, it's the lining, but the outside silk of the stays has to be quite nice, quite like well constructed, but it's a set of stays. It's, you know, structured, so all of that also has to sustain all of the pressure of being laced together. And, you know, you're not tight lacing because you can't really with stays, but like there's still pressure because you're sort of being compressed all around. You kind of get that uniform shape and to make it fit. So that's a really interesting process of making stuff look like it's not being tightened, like it's not being, you know, like there's no pressure on the outside silk. That's really hard to achieve while still having it fit and look good. So it's an odd mixture of those two things, but it's also such a fun and interesting exercise for your brain to be able to be like, okay, how do I do this so that it sits smoothly and it looks nice, but at the same time can kind of withstand the fact that underneath everything is very high tension, and it's a really cool balancing act. So I'm having a lot of fun with that. I am not having fun with the sleeves. And I know that that's the most cliche thing in the world to say, but oh my God, it's the worst. The sleeves on 17th century ball gowns, in case you're not familiar, is so, they're very, very much not usual. Like, I don't usually have a huge issue with sleeves because, you know, kind of at a certain point, if you're doing, I swear they do this just to make me upset. But the thing with the sleeves in generally most eras of fashion is that once you've done one, you've kind of done them all. Like, it's, you know, if you do a 50s set-in sleeve, or if you do an 18th century set-in sleeve, you know, like, life goes on. You do it once, you kind of get the gist, and yeah, it's a little bit of mind-bending geometry, but you kind of like make it work and you figure it out, and it's not the end of the world. But these sleeves, and I will show you in a second, are just the most appalling nightmare because they're off the shoulder and there's a lot of structure in them. So you're dealing with the fact that sort of the fabric is working against you because it wants to go a different way, because it's literally boned and lined with cardboard or like pasteboard, not even making that up, pasteboard lined sleeves. Okay. So all of that you're kind of working against in terms of physics. And on top of that, it's not sitting naturally where, like, you can kind of rely on the natural shape of a shoulder for most eras of sleeves, give or take. With the 17th century, everything kind of hung down around here on your body. So you're like, okay, I don't know where any of the natural sort of like points of reference are. So you're like relying on fake points of reference, like the seams that you've put in the garment, also mostly arbitrarily. So yeah, it's been an adventure, and honestly, I would say never again, except for that I've kind of fallen in love with this era a little bit. I've been watching, because I've been doing this project and looking at different references. I've been looking at a lot of sort of Dutch and French portraiture from the mid 17th century, and oh man, I just want to make all the pretty dresses from this period. Like, I didn't know almost anything about the 17th century before I started it, but like, dang, it's so cool. There's so much pretty stuff there. Everything's looking really cute. And I can't. Anyways, so I love it and I hate it. And hopefully I'll be able to do it better next time. Because yeah, this one's been a rough adventure. I think I did actually accidentally make 2 identical sleeves instead of a right sleeve and a left sleeve, which you can do in certain historical garments because they actually curve in a specific way. They're not mirror images exactly of each other in the way that we think of. So they're yeah, I've had to make it work somewhat. That's been interesting. Anyways, let's get on to a different question. I keep getting distracted and forgetting to actually sew, so maybe I should stop gesturing so much and actually answer the questions. Go figure. All right. Someone asked, what always scares you the most in sewing, and how do you get over that fear? By the way, I'm not naming anybody who asked a question who isn't personally known to me, just because I didn't let anybody know or ask anybody's permission to give out names. So I just want to, that's why I'm not personally ignoring you, as I just want to make sure that I didn't get permission to share your name. So I'm not going to share your name, but regardless, what always scares you the most in sewing, and how do you get over that fear? Honestly, I am like, fear might be the wrong word. I'm really kind of, almost to a fault, kind of fearless when it comes to the actual sewing process. Like I'm fairly like, say, like limitlessly bold when it comes to doing things. See aforementioned conversation about kind of overshooting ambition. Because I have a very robust attitude when it comes to sewing, which is that I am almost certain of failure whenever I start a sewing project. And not in a bad way, not in a I suck and I can't do this kind of way, but just in a way like that the reality is that failure is most certainly an option. Always when it comes to sewing, something could go wrong. I tend to recklessly hope for the best, but I don't expect it. And so I think that kind of weird pseudo-nihilistic fearlessness has led me to do some really awesome stuff. My fear, I think, a lot of the time comes from the sort of social aspect of sewing on the internet publicly. I'm fairly new to this hobby, both as a appreciator of it, as well as a doer of it, as well as like an engager in the public. What's the freaking word that I'm thinking of? Like, oh, you know, an exhibitor of it. Yeah, I'm fairly new to exhibiting the hobby as well as appreciating other people's doing of it. So I do worry on a social level. Yeah, Faye, thanks. Person to the public eye. Yeah, that's apt. Yeah, that's the one. But anyways, yeah, it's not something that I expected when I started, and it's not something I expected when I got really interested in it. And so, excuse me, that part of it, that this big wide world of people, both from a appreciator standpoint and a creator standpoint, does make me a little bit nervous that I'm, sort of toying with this legacy of historical costuming and costuming in general. And not that I will like mess it up, but just that that I'll make a misstep, that I will be not conscious of something about the culture, something about the world, something about the history of this like really kind of amazing community, and that I will put myself in a bit of a hole with that. So that anxiety then comes into play more, I think, than the actual sewing does. I have very little actual fear when it comes to sewing. Almost all of my fear has to do with putting it up on the internet and having people be upset that I did a thing that runs counter to how they feel it should be. And that I think more than anything is got over by the fact that we have this CosTube group. You'll see some of them in the chat who are amazing, who really do their best to make a space where not only can you screw up, but you should screw up. And maybe not everything that we think of as gospel in this community needs to stay that way, and not everything that we think of as the way to do things makes sense in a contemporary context. A lot of historical costumers, for instance, were doing this hobby prior to the internet being a big thing. So I feel like the democratization of the information maybe has, for some people, taken away something that they feel was theirs that they now have to share with the world. And I can understand that feeling to a certain degree. It's similar to when you've been into a band for a really long time and then everybody gets into it and you feel that impulse to do the hipster thing and say that, like, oh, I've been into this band forever, when really it doesn't matter. What you're trying to prove is that you're not a sheeple, which doesn't make any sense, because if everybody likes the band that you like, why wouldn't you just be happy that the band is being successful? But anyways, this is a bit of a rant on a rant. But yeah, just like I think I can understand the impulse, and I can understand the fear of people having that reaction to sort of the newcomers and the people doing it differently. And so I don't necessarily sympathize with it, but I empathize with it. And I think that is important to think about. I want to be respectful to the sort of old guard, but I also want to be able to do my own thing and make interesting things. And so that's where anxiety is too real. Let's do something silly and interesting for sorry, instead of just interesting and too deep. We've fallen too deep. So let's backtrack just a second. Is there another question that I can answer? Next question. What are your favorite costuming resources? So books, podcasts, etc. My favorite resource by any stretch of the imagination is the honest to God, the CosTube network. I know that I'm just like community all day long every day. I'm sure that at a certain point people are going to get really sick of that answer, but it is so true. Like it's this pure, beautiful hive mind. I think any hobby that you have, anything that you do, if you have a network of people who are also super passionate about it, you don't have to own every book. You don't have to know all of the perfect, amazing websites, because somebody in the community will know. Somebody in the community will have the link. Somebody in the community knows a person who knows a person who knows a person. That's what networking is all about. And so my favorite resource is the sort of CosTube, or costuming in general, hive mind. It doesn't even have to be YouTubers, but like the costuming hive mind in general is just so generous with their information most of the time. You just call somebody up or text somebody or message somebody or DM somebody and you say like, hey, I'm having trouble finding a reference for XYZ. And they'll be like, oh, here are these 17 bloggers that, you know, did stuff back in the day that are buried in the deep, deep holes of the internet because SEO wasn't a thing back then. And here you go. And so it's really cool to see what kind of you can dig up from the dregs of the internet if somebody has bookmarked it, 5 years ago. But if you're looking for actual books that are helpful, two things I have found to be really helpful. One is the books that everybody talks about, the books that are well regarded in the public sort of costuming community tend to be good because they're reliable. They're the ones that really help everyone because they're either really well researched or they're well written, and so they're understandable. I'm sure I have it somewhere because I'm sure that I was thinking that I might show y'all. Yes. So like things like Patterns of Fashion. Now, whether or not you find Janet, that's too much. Whether or not you find Janet Arnold to be a effective costume historian, whether or not you find the costumes to be effectively kind of analyzed, whatever, and I opinions differ on that. But the fact of the matter is that there's almost nobody else who has done that thorough of research on all of those gowns from all of those different periods, having had that access to all of these extant garments, being able to then break them down really does open some doors in a way that prior to that, people were just kind of making it up based on portraiture, based on old, very hard to read, tailor's manuals and handbooks and things like that. And that's not the kind of thing that you want to have to dig through all the time. Not everybody can read that stuff. And like, if you try to read 18th century English, it is just a nightmare. And I'm saying that as somebody who got a degree in it. It's not a good time. So really, like, I think that being able to decode that, being able to break stuff down, even the littlest bit, is really helpful. So books like Janet Arnold or the Nora Waugh Cut of Men's and Cut of Women's Clothes are really, really helpful because they, again, democratize that information by just laying it out there for you. So that's always super helpful. So I would, if you hear a book talked well of enough in the public discourse, Janet Arnold, Nora Waugh, these are the books that I would say are really high on the list in terms of things that I really like. But I have to get up for this because, of course, there is a subcategory, and this only works for more contemporary stuff. This isn't for stuff that's really old, because the further back you get, the less information that there is, and also the less readable the information is. But if you're working in the 20th century, may I recommend actual vintage sewing books. So the sewing books that were actually in print, in use by people at the time. So this one is Emily Post Sewing, originally Home Sewing. This one is really more of a glossary. It's just kind of a list of terms and techniques, but there's a lot of information about sizing and about like sort of the words you need to know, and the different types of collar and how to do a collar facing and things like that. These things that, you know, you would look up in a YouTube tutorial now, or you would look up in, you would ask somebody, because you don't feel like there's a lot of that information just kind of collected or collated. And they really, really did back then, because, you know, contrary to popular belief, you just didn't get born knowing this stuff. So sometimes these really, really nice ones, not really, really nice ones, for these really, really old ones, tend to be really helpful, even if they're not, you know, absolutely perfect all of the time. They do a lot of really good stuff to give you the basic techniques, but also it gives you a little bit of insight into what was being made at the time. So like this one is my baby. This one is Sewing Made Easy. It's the All About Dressmaking and Sewing for the Home, 1,000 easy step-by-step pictures. Just love the idea that like 1,000 pictures was an advertisement in a scary, enormous hardcover book. So it's things, I mean, there's a lot to be said for the fact that these books were definitely catering to a very specific demographic of people who wanted to look thin, and people who wanted to, you know, alter their shape in ways to make them look better. There's a lot of that, like, you know, how to change your shape. If you're pear-shaped, wear these. And if you're, you know, bell-shaped, wear these. I don't even know if those are shapes. I'm just making stuff up. But like, are you top-heavy? Are you pear-shaped is things that I'm reading out. What are your figure faults? Ooh. But all that being said, this is sort of this extant sort of example of what not only were the techniques of the time, but also, you know, what was being made. What was the cut of a thing look like, and how is it different from like the big fancy like celebrity photos that are most of what we have preserved from those time periods nowadays? Because not everything that is preserved in photographs is an everyday thing. Most things that are preserved in photographs are the special occasions and the celebrities and the what have yous. So when you get down to something like this, where the pictures are very much of just like what I can make and what I can make to like wear around the house, these give you this really, really cute insight into, like this, for instance. I think it's just so simple, so basic, and just a really great example of how you might be able to do something in a historically accurate way when it comes to like making something from the 40s or the 50s. But at the same time, you don't have to go fancy. You don't have to do the big ball gown, whatever. This, by the way, and the Emily Post book were gifts from my mom for Christmas a couple years ago, because my mom is awesome and keeps an eye out for things like that. So yeah, those are my two things. Like, if you've heard of something extremely well thought of, then that is usually the first go-to. They're really popular for a reason. They can help you as a jumping off point to almost anything. And then the second thing is, if you ever have access to extant resources that you can read, whether or not it's because it's contemporary or because you happen to have a talent for reading absolutely inscrutable 18th century technical texts. Either way, highly recommend. Can definitely say that those are my two favorite research techniques. How many other questions do we have? How do I get to my questions? I don't even know who is anything anymore. Okay, somebody asked, have you found any good Canadian suppliers for historical costuming? Yes and no. All of my favorite resources for historical costuming are kind of the things that I want to say everybody knows. That, again, assumes a lot about what people know and what people don't. But again, the thimble. There we go. Again, it is it's a rather straightforward case of what do other people reference. So I'll give you some from me, and we'll pass it along that way. The two that are my absolute favorite, no holds barred Canadian suppliers of fabric and or historical materials or historical-ish materials are Farthingale's Corset Supplies, which is just so nice to have a company that is literally designed for that kind of stuff in Canada. No idea how they just managed that. Nothing is in Canada, but they managed it somehow. And they do a booming business. They ship really quickly, and they always have really excellent stuff. I am currently using their boning for my 17th century project. So that's awesome. Very excited. Farthingales is what they're called. Farthingale's Corset Supplies. But they're referenced in the American Duchess 18th century guide to dressmaking, I think. Or maybe I'm thinking of Red Threaded. I think Red Threaded references them in most of their patterns as a place to get resources. So can recommend. Awesome. The other one is exclusively for linen, but as it is a expensive and hard to find in plain colors material, I will say that Pure Linen Envy is the be-all and end-all for linen in Canada. I have ordered just such the nicest handkerchief weight linen. Oh, it's actually what this is made out of. This is my 17th century shift, and it is just so soft and smooth and just so lightweight. I absolutely love it. And I cannot speak highly enough also of their shipping and receiving. I ordered quite a lot of this linen, I think 8 yards or something like that, quite a lot. And it came in a box that was about the size of a shoebox. They did not mess around with packing. They did not make it more wasteful than it had to be. They were just well, it fits, it ships. And I was very impressed with them. So those are my two. Other than that, I would say try to find some really nice local fabric stores that are independently owned, not necessarily because, corporations are evil, but more because I think that when you have a local owned store, they're much more likely to be able to answer your emails about special custom orders and things like that. So for Calgary, and they do local as well as international or national orders and things like that. There's a store in Calgary called Rick Rack Textiles, and they do a really cool combination of synthetics, natural fibers. They have a really good selection of things like wool and things like cotton and what have you. But more importantly, what they do really, really well is they will answer your questions. They'll tell you where a thing came from, what company they sourced it from. They'll tell you, if they're able to custom order something in. They were the first people I called when I was looking for a gravity feed iron. Turns out that they didn't stock that kind of stuff at the time, but somebody got back to me really quickly and recommended me a wholesale, a cleaning wholesale company that sold them for a reasonable price. So I got it from that website. And I would never have known to search there if it weren't for these people. So, along with Farthingales and Pure Linen Envy, which are both really great, I would say that my next most highly recommended thing would be just finding good fabric stores, nicely managed, positive, independently owned fabric stores with excellent customer service, because you'll find so many more resources because it's all in their network. This again, networking. This is what they do. This is what they know. So highly recommend. Oh, shoot. And again, not historical, but wholesaler businesses. So I mentioned the cleaner wholesalers. They are amazing. But the other thing that I will mention is that there's a store called Pacana, 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 and they are a wholesale business. So like supposedly you're supposed to have a business in order to deal with them, but if you call yourself a business, they're not. They have like a small retail front, if you will, but they mostly do stuff in bulk. So for instance, you can't usually buy just like one clip or clamp or something like that for whatever you're using. You have to buy 10 or 20, but depending on what you're buying and how much of it you're buying and how much you're going to be using it and how much of it is a sort of a staple of your sewing life, you pay pennies compared to dollars that you would pay in a regular retail store. So most of my twill tape, for instance, like what's holding up the waistband here is cotton twill tape. I've also used webbing, like cotton webbing, like you would get strapping and things like that from these places, or like studs and grommets and things like that. They sell them for just pennies because they're selling them in huge quantities. So like I think I've bought like 100 grommets at a time. But if you're making corsets, if you're making lacing things, if you're making historical clothing where you're not using zippers or things like that, you're going to use a lot of grommets in the end. So like, as long as you've got the space to store it, I would highly recommend buying some of these things in bulk. It's just so much cheaper. So yep, highly recommend. Okay, perfect. Let's see. All right, we're 35 minutes in, which means that I should probably actually make the announcement that I had intended on making, which was that as my 1-year anniversary celebration on YouTube, as well as just in the natural course of how things have gone in the intervening year, this I felt like was as fortuitous a time as any to launch my Patreon. So I'm going to be launching a Patreon page as soon as the live stream is done and concluded. I will then go to the Patreon page that I've queued up and set up, and I will make it public. So it's not public yet, it's not findable yet, but at the end of this, I will be going onto my Patreon page and making it public. And that's going to be a lot of fun and really exciting for me, because a couple of people have expressed direct interest, and a few people who have sent me Ko-fi donations have said that they wish that they could do this more regularly. And I know that there's a way to do it regularly on Ko-fi, but I don't think I have the account for that. I'm not sure, but regardless, it's been really clear to me that this is something that I can not only do consistently, but that I enjoy doing consistently, and that I like the work that I'm doing. I like how it makes me feel, and I think that on the whole, I want to keep doing it. And in order to keep doing it, I am eventually going to have to make money at it. And ad revenue on YouTube is one thing, but that is just such a different ball of wax. So I would 100% like to do this in a way that I feel is more rewarding, is less bound to the whims of ad revenue and the whims of the people who sell those ads. And I would like in general to be able to also give back to the people who are making that income for me. And so the Patreon is a really cool way to be able to do that. The perks as they are currently set up are set up in a few different tiers, and mostly at the base level, any patrons, regardless of whether you pick a tier or whether you are simply a patron, because I do believe that okay, I'm going to say something now, and it sounds weird, but Patreon recently did a thing where you can set your tiers and your contributions to be in your local currency, which means that on your end, you are not paying a significant transfer exchange fee when you collect the money. And this is great for us Canadians who have to constantly do math in our heads when we're asking for money in American dollars and receiving money in Canadian dollars. So I've set the sort of the levels for Canadian dollars. So forgive me, I'm not going to remember the totals for American dollars, because it's going to automatically convert for you in whatever currency is your local currency. When you sign on to Patreon, it'll convert for you. But that being said, the initial tier is around the $3 mark. And what that means is that you can donate per month. You can contribute per month $1 or $2 or whatever you want. But the sort of the first tier kicks in at $3. But regardless of whether you're contributing $1 or more or whatever tier you're at, the major thing that I'm going to be wanting to do with the Patreon is just giving people those little behind the scenes bits, whether that's like little mini vlogs or whether that's in progress pictures, because I find that on the whole, in progress pictures on Instagram isn't something that I do very often. And I find that for the most part, it's just because I don't feel super comfortable doing it. And I cannot explain to you why that is. I should probably examine that and what that line is to make sure that I'm not giving stuff away for free that my patrons are paying for, or vice versa. But all that being said, that is something that I'm really excited about being able to share with you guys, being able to talk about the things that I'm doing and sort of the feelings that I'm having while I'm doing it that maybe don't make it into the video, you know, a couple of goof videos every once in a while of like an extended cut of the flubs of videos, because I don't know if you've noticed, but I edit out a lot of stuff from my videos. I edit out almost every breath, every every ah. You might be experiencing that now, thinking, Liz is a little less articulate in real life. It's because I don't have my editing software and I can't edit out all of the ums and ahs and that I make noises with when I do my normal thing. So yeah, I think those would be fun to see. I think those would be fun to kind of, I hope maybe to humanize me a little bit in that way. I'm not an extremely articulate person. So hopefully that'll be a fun thing for the patrons. But then things will come up a little bit more in the higher tiers. Things like the things will come up in the higher tiers. Things like the ability to vote for future projects. I'll have little polls every once in a while, whether it's like picking a fabric for a garment or whether it's picking the garment itself. What am I going to do next? Those kinds of things, making those sort of fun key decisions where maybe it's a toss up for me and I just need a little bit of input. I think those would be really fun for people. And then when we get up to some of the higher level tiers, I'm working with a couple of artists in my community, and we were thinking that a really fun thing might be to have a commissioned portrait of me in a costume that I've created, and then have that portrait be a print that is distributed to some of the higher level patrons. And this is going to be cool for me in a couple of ways. One is I really very much enjoy, my partner and I run a small press in our community for artists and comics creators. And I think that being able to, in more ways, contribute to that artistic community is really important to me. And so I was trying to find a way that I could do that through YouTube and through Patreon. And I think that this would be a fun way to do it, where I would pay an artist a fair and equitable commission fee and have them produce something that they could then sell once that sort of cycle of patron donors has gotten their mail outs that they could then sell, they could then profit from. They also get a little bit of exposure in maybe a community that they wouldn't have before, because they don't, you know, these are not communities that cross over all that often compared to, say, you know, comics creators and things like that. Can you tell that I'm babbling? It's because I am. Anyways, that's some of the things that it would be available at the higher tiers, things like exclusive live chats, stuff like this that I'm doing, but a little bit more of a cozy casual sewing and a little bit less of me forgetting that I've got sewing in my lap every 5 minutes. So yeah, that's going to be good. So in about 15 minutes, I'm going to wrap up the live chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to answer a couple more questions. But if y'all have more questions, let me know, because I think I've only got a couple left of the people who've sent me stuff. And then we'll wrap up in about 15 minutes and I'll go and launch that Patreon page. So I'm so excited. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's see what other questions we have going on. Okay, so somebody's asked me about my favorite podcast to listen to while sewing. Interestingly enough, I don't actually listen to podcasts while sewing. I do listen to podcasts. Recently, my partner did a lot of data processing for a company who is tracking like audio radio usage and things like that. And one of the things that they were tracking was podcast usage. And I learned through that if you listen to more than 1 hour of podcasts per week, you are a power user. Okay. So by that note, I am definitely a tremendous power user. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I don't listen to them while I sew. I tend to watch movies and things like that while I sew, or other YouTube videos or random TV shows or things like that. Mostly stuff that I've seen before. I'm a rewatcher. I'm a chronic rewatcher of things. So I'll watch like all of my favorite Disney movies. I'll watch all of my favorite like dumb TV shows. Like I rewatch Friends about every year or so, every 6 months if it's it's a tough year. And so hello, people are coming in and saying hello again. So yeah, that tends to be while I'm sewing, what I'm doing is actually having the TV on and stuff like that. It's one of the reasons that you don't hear me talking a lot in the footage of me sewing, is because I've got something playing either out loud or in my headphones. So I'm not usually talking or making a lot of noise. But yeah, podcasts in general, though, I will say I have quite a few. So I'll list some of them now, because I'm always up for sharing everything and every one of my podcasts. Hello, Anne from Wales. This is so cool. I was really hoping that having it at noon would be okay, because it did mean that some people in Europe would actually be able to watch pre-bed, even though I knew that it was sort of in the middle of the workday for some people. So, cross your fingers. Alrighty, Rue. So podcasts time. Oh, and somebody's saying it in the comments. About Friends feeling different as an adult. 100% it feels different as an adult. It not only do you relate to certain things a little bit differently as an adult watching the TV show Friends, but also some parts of that have not aged well. And by that, I mean quite a lot of it. I will say, though, that on the whole, the degree to which things do not age well and the degree to which they still remain acceptable to you, very different for everybody. So I'm not going to judge anybody who says that they never watch Friends because it upsets them. I'll also be totally chill with people who do. It's just that it's my jam. I'll watch it. What can you do? But regardless, podcasts. This is why I can't do live streams. This is why I have to edit, because I just get, this is Liz's brain unedited. Is just, this is the way that we're going now. Okay. All right. Podcasts. Before anything else, number one podcast that always makes me feel good. Doesn't matter how I'm feeling. Doesn't matter how bad things are getting. Doesn't matter about anything. Can I Pet Your Dog? Can I Pet Your Dog? They have been doing podcasts for like 5 years at this point. The hosts changed. So originally the host was Renee and Allegra, and then in the last couple years, the producer Alexis has now become one of the hosts. But it is never not a good time. It is so much fun. They're so silly and funny. It's very loose as a podcast. It's not like a polished, high quality kind of thing. You're not listening to Serial. You're not listening to NPR. But it is so much fun. They just talk about dogs. It's so much fun. They're hilarious. They're silly. You just listen about dogs, about their dogs, about other people's dogs. It's just, yeah, it makes me so happy. It's just so relaxing. It comes out every Tuesday. The very first host, the very first show was Lin-Manuel Miranda. So go for it. Do your thing. They have amazing guests. They have sometimes very silly guests. Sometimes they have no guests at all. But yeah, all about dogs. I listen to My Brother and Me. I didn't think that I would like it. I did the mistake that a lot of people did, which was listen to it from the beginning. Don't listen to it from the beginning. The first 100 or so episodes, by their own admission, are awful. But they are very silly boys, and I have a good time listening to them do goofs with each other. I also listen to almost all of the podcasts that they do with other people. So each of them, there are 3 brothers, also have podcasts with their wives that are based sort of on their wives' things. And those are a lot of fun. So yeah, highly recommend. Again, another one that's mostly chaos, mostly just silliness and chaos, but I really like it. I listen to the Dear Hank and John podcast because I have been a Vlogbrothers fan since 2012, 2013-ish. And so I can't let go of anything that they do ever because I am obsessed. The Book Riot podcast. I mentioned Book Riot in my most recent video about romance novels. They do several podcasts about, mostly they divvy it up via genre, but also there's a book recommendation podcast where you can write in and ask for recommendations. You can, there's one where they'll do just reviews of some new releases that week, which are amazing. But the one that I listen to consistently is the Book Riot podcast, the straight up and down Book Riot podcast. And that one is fantastic because they just talk about the publishing industry. They just, if you're into the publishing industry, if you're into kind of the meat, the sausage being made, so to speak, of publishing and books and things like that, it's a really cool podcast for that. They do some really thoughtful examinations that are personal, but nevertheless measured and extremely nice to listen to. There's a lot of thoughtful stuff that goes into those that I feel like if you're into the publishing industry, if you're into books, is super important, super interesting. So yeah, can highly recommend that one. Other than that, let me see. Other than that, it's a lot of the same things, like not a lot of the same. What I mean is the stuff you've heard about, things like NPR shows like 99% Invisible. No, wait, hang on. This is good. This is silence. Just solid silence, Liz. I can't remember if it's NPR. I don't think it's NPR that does 99% Invisible. It might be something else. Anyways, regardless. 99% Invisible is one of the shows that people always talk about, but I think very few people actually feel the need to listen to because they look at the titles and they think that it's going to be dull. And I have to say it is absolutely fascinating. They do an amazing, amazing, amazing thing where they'll go into an object or an item or a concept or a piece of architecture or a feature of infrastructure or something like that, and they will go deep and find the story there. And weirdly, there is always a story there. Go figure. And it's this idea that like design, how our world is designed is, quote, 99% invisible, thus the title. And it is absolutely exquisite. You'll never look at brutalist architecture the same way. You'll never look at the Navy chair the same way. You'll never look at mailboxes the same way. It is so interesting. So yeah, that one again, also nothing in this world will make you relax faster than hearing Roman Mars talk. So can highly recommend. The podcast that I have listened to the absolute longest continuously, as well as one of the first ones that I've ever listened to that was amazing. I was working as a library assistant when I was in university, because of course I was, and I needed something to listen to, and I was desperate for anything at that point. And I just kind of searched. I don't even remember what I was searching. This was pre-smartphones. So I was doing it on my, I was downloading it on my computer and then uploading it to my little iPod Nano. This is old times. But the podcast was the Classic Tales podcast. The Classic Tales podcast is run, hosted, and voiced by BJ Harrison, who's a professional voice person. Mostly he does audiobooks, and he does his own audiobooks now, and he runs his entire company website of audiobooks. He sells them, but this podcast is short stories usually, but he also does longer form novels over the course of several episodes that he'll just read a story that is in the public domain. And because he is a professional voice guy, he has just the most exquisite voices and just the most fantastic characterizations. It's just, yeah, I'm all about it. Highly recommend. And the Classic Tales podcast, BJ Harrison, absolutely fantastic. And I've been listening to him and his podcast now for 13 years. Okay, feeling a little old now. Can't handle it. We're going to move on. But yeah, Classic Tales podcast. Can Highly recommend. Other than that, I also listen to audiobooks like crazy. I listen to audiobooks constantly. So that's another one. I can't make any recommendations because it's whatever books you like to read. Chances are there's a good audiobook version of it. But yeah, good ones. Okay, I'm going to look through the chat really quick because I did see a couple of questions go by. So I need to just make sure that I'm not skipping any of them too much. Favorite fabric to use or material you can't do without. Oh dang. Yeah, 100%. I would not be able to do any of my sewing without without okay, this isn't really a material, but it is what I refer to as the fabric store of mom. My mother is not only is my mother a fabric person. She likes to collect fabric. She likes to use fabric because she's a quilter, but also she's one of the point people for a large sort of community drive of fabric in our community, in our city. She does a huge fabric drive every year with a charitable organization that she volunteers with. And so one of the things that happens is people will bring masses of donations to her house. And then I will sort of, as payment for volunteer hours that I put into the charity organization at various times, whether that's like on a consulting basis for them setting up an Etsy page, or whether that's just helping out with the sale when it happens, I will get sort of first crack at some of the fabric. And it's donated fabric, so it's not going to usually be the high-end stuff. This is usually where I get most of the polyester that I'll use as stash fabric, but it is nevertheless really, really excellent. So yeah, I can't say no to that. But in terms of actual fibers, like in terms of actual fabric, I'm obsessed with sewing with linen. I love sewing with it so much. Linen that I've gotten that is sort of in a contemporary weave, like things that I've gotten from Rick Rack Textiles. I've gotten linen from Burnley and Trowbridge, which is also very good. I actually need to put in an order with them now that I think of it. I'm going to make a note because ADHD brain, if you don't make a note, it's not going to happen. Cool. Fantastic. Thank you for your patience, guys. Linen, just I worship linen. Being able to finger press something so that it stays down while I sew it is an absolute miracle for somebody who sews in bed and does not want to have pins in the bed, which has happened way too often and needs to stop. But also just because the feel is really nice. It's so versatile a fabric. It also is one of the best fabrics if you are absolutely going to mess up your clothes and look like you slept in them. Linen is just a great way to be like, well, it's linen. You breathe on it, it folds, so you don't have to pretend like you're going to iron it every time. Because if you iron it, it will immediately crease again. So it's the perfect excuse for that. Muse and Dionysus. Dionysus is how some people say it, and I get really confused when they do that. I don't know why I did it just then. Muse and Dionysus, favorite dinosaur to own. Yes. Dinosaurs. I don't actually have my favorite dinosaur is so basic because I grew up as a 90s kid. So my favorite dinosaur is a Triceratops because 90s kid. So what can you do? I don't actually own one though. But what I don't have children. I don't yet own dinosaurs again in my life. I feel like that's something that only happens when you have kids of a certain age that like dinosaurs again, or like nieces and nephews. My nieces are both not super into dinosaurs. One of them is really into whales, and that's my favorite thing ever. She's got like, her parents call it the pod. It makes me just so happy. But yeah, no dinosaurs. My favorite is wrong, Velociraptor. I'm using Dionysus. Are we talking like Michael Crichton velociraptors? Or are we talking like the turkey looking feathered things? Because both are awesome, but yeah, both are, I will say, pretty cool. One of the questions that I got on my YouTube videos comment last week was a question about, she said, what's the series of books that's between the key and the little glass thing with a house in it on your shelf? And what she was referring to was this key here, and I think this is the glass thing that she was referring to. It's not a house. This is a little crocheted octopus. His name is Bert. He lives in here. This is his house. He likes head scritches and he likes a clean workspace, which is why he's constantly on the shelf judging my mess, in the hopes that I will clean it up. So that's Bert. A friend of mine made that for me a few years ago, and he just lives there now. The key is the key to the first apartment we ever had as a couple, my partner and I. We'd only ever lived either with parents or like in basement suites and things like that, or with roommates. And so this was the first apartment that we'd ever had that was just ours, and it was in Britain. So all of the keys like this, all of the houses in Britain have keys like this because they're still secretly in the 19th century. They'll deny it, but they're secretly in the 19th century because their keys look like this, which means that basically it looks like you could break the lock with your teeth. But whatever, that was awesome. But the series of books. The series of books is it's the Collector's Library editions of classic novels. So this is one of my absolute favorite editions of any book whatsoever, because the covers look like this, and these are really fun. But when you open them up, they're cloth bound with just a little embossed sailboat, which is the Collector's Library signature look. And then they have like gold foil on the outside. And these are no longer in print, as far as I can tell. There is the Collector's Library is still doing stuff, but they do a different look now. They're blue on the outside, and they've got a different slight look to them, and those are also fine. But these are my absolute favorite. Whenever I see these out in the world, I'll buy them in used bookstores. I've bought a bunch from like estate sales and things like that because they were cheap at the time, so a bunch of people bought them, but not everybody keeps them. And yeah, they fit, almost all universally fit in my 18th century pockets, as well as most of my purses. So they're also great to-go books. Fun fact, whenever somebody says things like, oh, no, get back in there. Whenever somebody says things like, when are you going to, what would you save from a burning building? You think that that's a hypothetical question, but a few years ago, there was a major flood in Calgary, and we actually had to evacuate our house. Our house was fine, as it turned out, but we did have to evacuate because the neighborhood became heavily flooded, and I literally saved this book. I had always said that it would be a thing that I would save from a burning building, and it turns out I saved it from a flood. So fun fact, yeah, Pride and Prejudice. Not only is this my favorite book, this is my favorite book. This one with the fabric and the gold leaf, and like the gold leaf is almost all faded off. I don't know if you can see that on the video, but like I've rubbed it off because I carry this book with me everywhere. If I don't have a book to read and I'm going somewhere where I'll need a book to read, I will have this as well as my ebook and what have you, because I can always open this book up. It doesn't matter where, and I'll know where I am in the book and what I can expect. And I love it so much, and I read it all the time. I also have about 5 other editions of this book, including one in the Japanese language and an ebook in the French language. I have an ebook and audiobook, and I also have the collected works in a shelf above and things like that. I'm obsessed with this book. So yeah, it's awesome. These are fantastic editions, but yeah, that's the editions that are up there. Any other questions? Somebody asked a question that I saw. Favorite tattoo? I have 5 tattoos. 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I have 5 tattoos. Oh, that's a worry. I don't. It's like picking between my children. I feel like I secretly have a favorite, but I don't like to say it out loud. This one definitely, obviously, for both its size as well as its cost, is a personal favorite. I also think the quality of it is fantastic. It is George and the Dragon, and the reason for that is long and complicated. I'm not going to get into it now because we're wrapping up in a couple of minutes. But I just love it. It cost me so much money and took so much time, but it is one of my favorite things, and I love it so much. This one, though, is the newest one, and one that I think probably means the most. It is, let's see if I can get you guys to see that. I don't know if it's reversed or not. If it's reversed for you guys, what the text says is yours, etc., but it says it in the way that you would sign off a 19th century letter from the Regency period. And there's lavender and there's roses, and it's a love letter shape. That shape and that look is based on an old school tattoo design from the old school of tattooing, and so that's what I was trying to evoke, but at the same time wanted to have it make reference to my love of see aforementioned Pride and Prejudice. And the yours etc sign off is something that I actually have very strong feelings about. It's something that I wrote essays in university about and did presentations about. It's very much a loaded phrase in many ways, in the way that the people who use it often are deeply familiar to the person they're writing to, so much so that you don't have to say the, beautiful, long-winded salutations when you're saying goodbye. You can just say yours, etc., as if to say, and you know the rest. And it's less of a lazy expression and more of a, like, you literally know the rest. You know how much I love you. I don't have to say it. And I love that sentiment, and it makes me very happy. So I feel like this one probably is actually my favorite. But I got it in Sydney, in Australia a couple years ago. Not a couple years ago. Oh, what is even time? I got it in October 2019, because I was down in Sydney. I was down in Australia for my sister's wedding in Brisbane. And then I went to Sydney for a couple of days, and so I got a tattoo while I was down there, almost on a whim. I had kind of been planning the tattoo for a while, but I hadn't planned on getting it in Sydney, and just thought, while I'm here, this is about as crazy as I can get. So I went to a little Sydney tattoo parlor, and got the tattoo. I have forgotten the name of the tattoo parlor offhand, but if I remember it, I'll maybe put it on Instagram, because that guy deserves a shout out, because he did an amazing job of listening to the very persnickety demands of a 30-something who came into the shop with some 19th century text and a lot of time on her hands. So awesome. Anyways, okay, I promised I would show you, so it'll be the last thing I do before we go, is I'll show you the stuff. It's not done yet, so I'm not gonna put it on. But 17th century shift, 17th century under petticoat. This is just the cast off lining of a curtain that I dyed to be a fun color, because I had some extra color. And then the waistband, as aforementioned, 4 yards of fabric, gotten into about 28 inches total for the waist. So all of that very, very cartridge pleating. It's going to be a lot of fun. So it's going to get, it's a little bit flat at the front to get that really nice smooth front edge that was really big in the 17th century. And then all of the cartridge pleating at the back is going to give it that really nice poof at the back without needing any of the bum rolls or anything like that, because the 17th century, when it got to the middle of the 17th century, had kind of slimmed down that silhouette a little bit. And then the top is going to be this guy. So, this is not a good, I'm going to have to get up a little bit. So I'm not going to put it on because it's full of pins and I'm terrified of getting myself, but it's, see, like that. But it ties at the front. There are eyelet holes behind that bit of lining, but that is roughly the shape of it. So these are smooth covered stays. So inside are all of the boning channels and things like that, but that's all done on the inside. And then the silk covering is put over top of it to give it that smooth covering. And then the sleeves, as you can tell, this is going to be off the shoulder. So the sleeve head is like way down on the bottom of the shoulder. And when you turn it around, all of that cartridge pleating and all of that big poofiness is due to both boning and the heavy pasteboard that's also in the cartridge pleats, along with the fabric and the lining and the buckram and all of that jazz. So there's a lot of stuff in there that's going into that. There are also going to be some bits at the bottom, some bodice skirts, if you will, that are going to be about that long. That will give it that little bit of a little bit more of a poof at the end. And then it's all going to be closed center front. But yeah, those are the eyelet holes that I worked very hard on. I was very pleased with that. For those of you who are asking, it is dyed. It is actually the same red taffeta that I made my Halloween dress out of, but I did some dye extraction and then added the blues and grays to give it this sort of purpley color. It ended up more lilac than I'd wanted. I had wanted it to be more of a silvery blue, sort of a little bit closer to what this mottled mess turned into. This is mottled mess, by the way, because it was polyester, and so it only can dye so much with traditional dyes. You need to get polyester specific stuff in order to do that. So this turned out to be more lavender or more lilac than I had intended, but I am sort of, what's the word I'm thinking of? I'm sort of retconning a reason for the lilac into the story. For those of you who are familiar with Ella Enchanted, you'll remember that the smell of lilacs is a sort of telltale sign that Lucinda is close by. So that is sort of one of the reasons that I'm using it, is the sort of lilacs are this kind of in a couple of different parts of the story. The color as well as the smell and the flower are kind of sort of pseudo symbols of oppression for Ella. So in a weird way, the ball gown being purple, I felt like was metaphorically resonant. So like I said, retconning it into the design, because that's what you have to do when things don't go the way that you need them to. So anyways, with that, thank you for sitting with me this hour. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for everybody for hanging out. I am going to, oh yes, somebody just asked if this is for the Foundations Revealed contest. Yes, that's the stuff that I'm working on for the Foundations Revealed contest, which means that I need to have it done tonight, because the deadline for us in the West, for us in the Mountain Time region, the deadline is 10 a.m. on the 3rd, which means that it definitely needs to be done tonight, because there's no way that I'm going to do it tomorrow morning, because that seems like cutting it way too close. So with that, I'm going to wrap up so that I can finish this and have a lovely video for you guys to see tomorrow, the 1 minute long video, and then get going on other videos. So I'll launch the Patreon as soon as I close this out. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. This was a lot of fun. And I'll talk to y'all in a little bit, but in the meantime, bye.